Segal talks at the Martini Segal Theater Center, the great graduate center, CUNY, in the middle of Manhattan in Midtown New York, that looks in a way fuller than with people on the street than it was the last weeks and months ago. The stores are, more and more of them actually are empty. So it's confusing what we see out there. We first time spotted people who have suitcases on wheels, and so it must be tourists and not just people from maybe Rikers Island who are going to the hotels, or people who are replanted. I helped them from the streets. So the mood is great. People are outside, they are talking. Nobody really knows, should you put on the mask or not? Do you take it down when the waiter comes? But all in all, things are moving forward in a good way. We think there's, I think, good leadership. Some news from the world are very troubling, especially from India. It is catastrophic. We heard from our Indian colleagues, and Anurupa Roy, who actually also was with us. She's in the hospital at the moment, struggling for her life. And Abhishek, one of our contacts in India, a great writer and playwright, is up all night with his volunteer group to connect people who need Corona help with hospitals, the few that remain. They're all volunteers, and just 2 people of his group died. So it's stunning what is happening. On the other hand, we heard also great news about, for example, about Chile last week from Martin and Marco about this great referendum. The constitution will be rewritten. It's a sensational development of an election that will now help to overturn a constitution since the Pinochet years. So the world is in flux as always. Nothing stays what it is. And we are all wondering, where are we? Where are we coming from? And where are we going to? And today we have guests with us who are also part of world theater, global theater, world theater history. It is the form that is called kind of Yiddish theater, a very, very significant, I think, contribution that was made towards the idea of what theater is, means, where it comes from, what it carries. And so today we have with us Ellen, Yelena, and also Shane, 3 veterans of the scene. And I think really want to thank you all for joining us. Before I read your bios and we learn more about what you do, where are you now? Shane, where are you? I think you don't have your...
Right now I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, visiting my mother for the first time in a year and a half.
Oh my God, is it your first trip out of New York?
No, actually, thereby hangs a tale, which we'll get into, but Alan, Yelena, and I played theater on the road, socially distanced, in Hackettstown, New Jersey.
Fantastic. Socially distant Yiddish theater. And Alan and Yelena, where are you guys?
We're here in front of the computer.
And are you in...
I'm sorry, I got a little confused.
You're in Allentown and Yelena Town.
If you've ever been to Yiddish theater, you'll understand why we like to do it socially distanced.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of our audience members like to stay as far away from each other as possible because they know each other and they know that's the wisest thing to do.
So you are in New York City at the moment?
We are very near the CUNY Grad Center, very near the Segal Center.
Amazing, amazing. I had no idea. So let's tell our audience a little bit. Let's start with Shane. He is one of the great actors of the Yiddish stage today in the Americas, and he started as Vladimir in Beckett, so waiting for Godot, I think is the one by Moshe Yasur, what he directed.
Yes, correct. It's Moshe's production.
Yeah, one of the great directors of Yiddish, one of the old masters who learned himself from the old masters. I hope he is listening. And the New Yorker was very highly full of praise for that exceptional production, the Congress. And where did you do it? At the...
We did it at Castillo.
The Castillo
Theater, the All-Stars Theater.
We also were invited to tour it. And so he is a Yiddishist, he says, and he is a dedicated part of his life to this great form, that great tradition of Yiddish theater, and they produced also the Dybbuk, a very significant, perhaps the most well-known, and perhaps also the best play coming out of Yiddish theater, and many others. And he also worked with a company that is very significant for New York City, for the history of New York City, for the history of avant-garde, in a way, even for the history of the New York punk music movement. It's the Ridiculous Theater Company, a very important contribution at the Segal Center. I think we hosted the 50-year celebration, and I hope one day we might also get Quentin here or others, to talk about how they are doing. And then with us also is Alan Louis Rickman, and he is a director, translator, and writer, and they did so many works. You can look it up and see it. We also in our email announcement put them out, but everything that is everything in the Yiddish theater he has done, and he really is together also with Yelena represents the soul in a way of Yiddish theater here in New York, a work that also the Folksbiene carries on. Of course, they are very famous, both of them, he and Yelena, for being in the Coen Brothers movie, A Serious Man. That's a significant credit. And I think, Ellen, you also were in Boardwalk Empire. I think I saw you there somewhere hanging around with the gangsters, and many more things, even so you didn't even mention it. Yelena Shmulenson is perhaps best known for killing the Dybbuk in the Coen Brothers Oscar-nominated film, and she is responsible of the miserable life, of Michael Stuhlbarg centuries later. So we all have to see it as a fantastic. But she's also in Orange and the New Black, Boardwalk Empire, so many things. But of course, in the center of, I think it's fair to say, of their love for this theater, for the work for this theater, is that thing that is called Yiddish theater. She's also a Russian Yiddish coach trainer and a translator, and she has gotten many awards for her recorded books in English. So you guys, we of course know, I think at least a little bit, what Yiddish theater is all about. Who for the audience, we also have international listeners. Maybe give us a little context about that form. Where does it come from, and how do you keep it alive? I don't know who would start with that.
Jane, you, me, Yelena?
I'll let the theoretician do the work.
Well, Alan is the great expert in Goldfaden. I mean, pre-Goldfaden, there's not a lot of Yiddish theater. He's considered the birth of it, but Yiddish theater before that was pretty much Purimspielen, plays that were performed at the festival of Purim, and I believe it was primarily all men. And aside from that, Jewish tradition doesn't look too favorably on theater. But then along comes Alan. Take it away.
And then along comes Avram Goldfaden, which was really the beginning of. There's a very good book that came out just recently called The Birth of the Modern Yiddish Theater, which is exactly about the Goldfaden era and the Goldfaden revelations. And Goldfaden this is at the time of what was called the Haskalah, which is the Jewish Enlightenment. Prior to that period, which was in the mid and late 19th century, Jewish culture was strictly either religion, a religious related culture, or people would basically assimilate into the general population. But there was no vibrant Jewish secular culture. That was the Haskalah. Well, literature started, journalism started, and Goldfaden basically was the fellow who brought theater into the Yiddish world. And he started it completely himself. He started with tiny little productions, with tiny little companies, for which he wrote.
In Russia, right? He started out in Russia?
His very first productions were in Romania, and then he very shortly afterwards moved to Russia, and he traveled all around Eastern Europe. He performed in Russia, he performed in, I'm just about positive, Ukraine. He went back to Romania. Up until the latter decades of the 19th century, he was all around that area. He had some great successes in Kiev, so yes, he was in Ukraine, and he then came to the United States, went back. He was peripatetic, as Yiddish theater was tremendously at that time. Yiddish theater became very, very quickly a worldwide phenomenon, and became it was highly popular in any place where there was an immigrant Jewish population, an Eastern European immigrant Jewish population, which means throughout the Western world, in South America, in South Africa, of course, all up and down North America and Central America, all over Western Europe. And it took off from there. I want to have a little quibble with a phrase that you used, Frank, if I may, which is Yiddish theater as a form. The truth is Yiddish theater really isn't a form. Yiddish theater is many, many forms. Every possible form of theater you can think of has been done in Yiddish. It started with very straightforward popular theater, and it later expanded to basically, and so much the innovative theater of the 20th century comes from Yiddish theater from various places and various times.
Yeah, no, this is quite a remarkable story. Goldfaden, who I think came from Romania, was a star in Russia, then had to leave Russia, then he became a big star in Romania, then he was forced out of Romania, came as an older man, almost people thought he was dead already. He came to New York, became a celebrity. I think 100,000 people came to his funeral here, and so much of also of American theater through Stella Adler. I think the Adler family was part of his company, and the idea of musicals, the idea of melodrama. You have melodies and you have a drama, the Broadway music of jazz, klezmer music, the soul and also of kind of the Yiddish theater, of the Klage, the Kvetching, and so many, many other things. It was an important contribution. Yeah.
One specific one. Which is acting styles. Naturalistic acting is something in America that came from Yiddish theater. It was one of the things that was highly, highly prized by theater audiences early on was naturalistic acting and the kind of detail in acting that people would recognize. Small bits of business, little turns of character, little acting choices that people would make. I mean, realize you're coming out of the late 19th century, you're coming out of it's the actor-manager era still, and we're used to, in the Western world, more declamatory style of acting, where everything revolves around the central figure, whereas in Yiddish theater, the supporting characters became very important, and the nature of their acting style became a real model, and many, many, many non-Yiddish speakers would come downtown to the Lower East Side to see, specifically to watch the acting. John Barrymore would go to Yiddish theater to watch the acting styles. Many of his predecessors would go down to Yiddish theater to watch the kind of acting they were doing, which, as I said, was filled with detail that an audience would watch and they would kvell, which means to express a certain kind of pride/pleasure. So natural, they would say, so real.
And so much of American screen acting then through actors, but also for the work of the new group, which was highly influenced also by the Adler method in a way, and it's their direct bloodlines. Incredible in a way. What came out of that was, in a way, immigrants, refugees, people who were harassed in their own countries came to America and brought part of a culture that then got reintegrated, remixed, we would say hybrid forms, and came out of it. But since our talk also is about the time of Corona, how are you doing? We had, for example, people who work in circuses and tap dancers, also forms who are not at the center at the moment, of attention. Even so, I think they really should, especially circus, and also tap dance is a great American invention like jazz. So how are you guys doing? How does Yiddish theater work in the time of Corona? What did you do? How did you survive? And accept a trip which you took to New Jersey. So we heard about. So what's going on? How are you doing?
Yelena?
Doing just like everybody else is doing. It was hard the first 6 months, I think. And then I think once one of these two came up with the idea of doing the Dybbuk.
Shane, this is all Shane's doing.
Shane came up with the idea of doing Dybbuk online as sort of a supernatural online presence. We really felt like we really got busy because there was all of a sudden a lot of things to do and plan and rehearse and record, and that took a while, and it feels like things are picking up now, and it's much better than 2020 was for me.
We started earlier on in the pandemic, like a lot of people were doing a lot of Zoom plays, a lot of online readings, and then Shane came up with this idea of doing something more substantial, and then we basically, starting with the Dybbuk, we tried to work towards another form, which is to say, an online version of a theatrical experience rather than just a reading with everybody sitting in boxes like we are right now on this chat. And this is Shane's doing, so let me throw it to him.
Yeah.
Sure, thereby hangs a tale. First and foremost, I would say that as counterintuitive as this might sound, there has been a silver lining to the pandemic for the world of Yiddish. It has grown, as we say, like mushrooms after a rain. It has enabled, I mean, a few people like Kolya Borodulin at the Workers' Circle with his Yiddish classes had adopted the online format for international learning or even cross-country learning, but it became a necessity once the pandemic hit. And so we had at the Congress for Jewish Culture a Yiddish Seder online. I was very much against anything online. I hate it. I still don't really like it because it's not, live theater is just what interests me, live performance. But I saw this Seder and we had people from all over the world, and I said, okay, we'll do something for Shalom Aleicham's Yortzeit, for the anniversary of his death. And we got people from Israel, we had every continent covered. We even had a greeting from Antarctica. Mm-hmm. So with a seal rolling in the background and some Yiddish. So it became clear that, yeah, it is possible, there is an upside. We can get the best actors from around the world for something. But I had been wanting to save this 100th anniversary production of the Dybbuk for a live thing. And it became clear that, no, this pandemic is not going to be over in December. So Alan agreed to direct it. And it's really Alan who took that and said, the regular standard Zoom reading will not apply here. So at this point, if you want to talk about that Dybbuk, and when Yelena says all of a sudden we got very busy, I'll tell you that part of the reason they got so busy is because we didn't decide to do it online until about 3 weeks before the actual hit. And Alan worked like a madman to come up with what became a really wonderful production. Alan, do you like to talk about?
Thanks. I'll try not to repeat what Shane said, but I think that there are a couple of key things. Is the weird upside, because one of the issues in doing theater in Yiddish is, look, where do you get the cast from? We have a pool of people in New York, a fair-sized pool of people, but it is still, although I say it's not minuscule, it is still limited. And there are wonderful Yiddish actors in Israel, in Berlin, in in Strasbourg, although he's now in Argentina, et cetera, et cetera. So this online situation gave us the opportunity to have people work together in a way that would be borderline impossible for all reasons of practicalities, were it not for this situation. And what I tried to do, is something I alluded to before, which is to say, make it vivid. Try to find ways to make the online production feel, to the greatest extent possible, as if people are actually in the same space. We found visual ways of doing that, to feel like people are sharing a space like they're sharing a stage space. And also to use visual elements that help in the narrative to replace the things, the stage elements that we couldn't normally get. So you can't do a set, obviously, in an online production like this, but we found visual replacements for that so that we could put them into an environment that becomes itself part of the fabric of the story. Just like in Yiddish theater, the language itself is always so much the fabric of this part of the fabric of the story.
And the language shape. But just to recap, a theater that, started with Avram Goldfarb, I would say 1870 or 1880, I don't know exactly when, but then morphed, transformed, traveled of the world through migration, through, through the refugees, through immigration, now all of a sudden, in the time of Corona, a small company, and you are non-profit, if I understand right, like every non-profit company in New York City is struggling for survival, all of a sudden you do a Yiddish play online with Zoom because you're forced to do it and you seem to like it. You say, we connected to people. People send us greetings from Antarctica with the SEAL actors we couldn't connect to. Do you feel for your form, and Yiddish theater was so significant? Ellen Stewart's, I think, first theater she had, it was a Yiddish theater she took over, as so many on the Lower East Side. Do you feel for that form, even though Ellen says it's not one, but for that idea of Yiddish theater, is it a revitalizing thing, or do you think it contributed to the slowly fading of something that is and was so important?
Shane?
I'm not sure I understand the question. You mean the pandemic and Zoom, if it contributed to the...
help the Yiddish theater? Do you think it was one more thing? Because if anything, I saw the Leo Back Institute, what you guys did. You need to see that live, the beautiful comedic way, the representation on stage, and to see something as, as it's also built, something as soulful and playful and melodramatic, but to see it on a screen, on a computer, I cannot think of a bigger contrast. So, but do you think, so this form, your way of working, did it help you to go on once it's over, to find new ways, to have new audiences?
I view it as a blip in our history. I think it's something that historians and grad students might study in the future, but I don't think it's going to have a huge change in Yiddish theater for the coming decades. I have to argue against the idea of a decline in Yiddish theater these days. I think that the audience is perhaps not as strong. I mean, it's definitely not as strong as it was, and there's not as large a pool of talent. But I sat down and figured out the other day that there were 7 Yiddish theater companies in New York. Now, only 3 or 4 of them are actually producing anything, but on paper, there were this number of Yiddish theaters. What are the names? Well, I mean, I don't want to go too Monty Python on you, but the first 2 names I'll mention are the National Yiddish Theater and the Yiddish National Theater. Yelena, what did you say?
Not confuse the two. Those are separate organizations.
Yes. There's the National Yiddish Theater, which is the Folksbiene. There's the Yiddish National Theater, which is the Hebrew Actors Union. There is the New Yiddish Rep, which actually produced Waiting for Godot in Yiddish, the first of all there at the Castillo Theater. There is the Yiddish Public Theater, which really relates to Yiddish National Theater if you see the names in Yiddish. There is the Joseph Papp Yiddish Theater. So there are 5. There's the Congress for Jewish Culture with its Reuter Kutter Theater that Moshe Yasur is directing, and Alan has done some things through it. Then there's Alan's Theater, which is Chobze in Bud, which is a production company, but really it's a theater. And there's 1 or 2 that I'm leaving out, just because I can't remember all these names.
Right. Now we've lost a couple of friends.
Huh?
Now we've lost a couple of friends, whoever you're leaving out. Thanks a lot.
Yes. No, we lost 1 friend who has 2 theaters. Yes. So all of these theaters have brought together an international audience or performed internationally. I mean, brought together international actors or performed internationally. But what Zoom did was allow us to bring together a whole group of people all at once in a way that was kind of previously unimaginable. I don't know if that will bring in funding that will allow us to do something like a live production of that Dybbuk, or a live production of Mcgillis Cycle, which was the second show we did with Mike Burston directing. And in that one, we actually did kind of create sets. For the Dybbuk, Alan came up with these woodcuts that we put together as a feed between the scenes, and kind of, it was eerie how they reflected the action of the play. So then for Mcgillis Cycle, I engaged someone, Adam Whiteman, to create new paper cuts, a very Jewish form of art, that provided the settings for the Zoom boxes, which were then cut in by our brilliant editor, who never edited a thing before in his life, this guy named Uri Schretter, who's he's a grad student at Harvard, and basically he can do anything he sets his mind to. But yeah.
Let me disagree with you on one point in response to Frank's question. I don't think that this, Frank, I agree with you absolutely 100%. There is no substitute for a live audience. Theater exists to be a communal moment, to be a communal activity. And you cannot have a communal activity without a bunch of live bodies together in a room. That said, this form that has been developed since the pandemic is very useful, and I think will continue in despite the fact that we're going to come back to please God, some form of normal life, because it allows us to do certain projects that ought to be done that aren't possible to be done without this form. Shane and I have been talking about various scripts from the Yiddish theater canon that would require, if we were actually to do them for real on stage, insane amounts of resources. Because, you know, back in the day, Yiddish theater, like every other type of theater in the world, a century and a century ought to go, they produced large. They produced, casts were always big. There were always multiple sets, and that detail in the sets was very important, etc. The physical part of the production was very important. So when you combine the size of the casts and the and the physical expense, the physical difficulties, and the availability of actors, this form is perfect to do if we want to do a text that would not otherwise be done.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you know, please, we do very much want to get back to performing for a live audience that where we're all in the room together sharing the experience.
Yeah.
I just want to add, what you said, Alan, reminded me of something. I've met no less than 3 statisten, spear carriers, we say in English, people who played with Maurice Schwartz's theater back in the day, or say they played with the theater because they went into a couple of shows, you know, carrying a spear. At that time, you know, in the 30s, in the 20s, you could put out a call and you could have 40, 50 young people come in and be ready to, you know, go on stage for their hour, or, you know, for their 5 minutes at a certain point, maybe with no lines or whatever. The last example of that I've really seen was when we played Carrot O'Brien's God of Vengeance translation at Show World back in the late 90s. We had an open call to yeshiva bochrim and people from this Cholent group that if you're in Manhattan and you want to see and be a part of this show, just drop in at this hour, and, you know, we'd make sure they had on a yarmulke and a jacket, and we'd tell them, okay, this is what we're going to do. And they'd go in and be the party guests, and then they'd leave, or they'd sit in the theater and watch the show. But that's, yeah, it's true. There might be some more things come out of this that would otherwise be impossible.
I do think so, and it's stunning that you know, many companies or small companies are putting their small spaces, yes, television studios, you know, up there, that they think there will be an online presence, even if everything goes back to normal. But who knows when the next pandemic will come? As many remind us, Bruno Latour and many others, you know, maybe this is just a rehearsal for environmental catastrophes that will come, and it will be much worse. The significance of this play, the Ansky play, the Dybbuk, just to point out, if I'm not mistaken, I think Peter Brook did it in 1990. I actually saw it. I think Miriam Goldsmith was the great actress It's a fantastic play. It's part of world theater, world history. And let's come to that idea of the ghosts or the undead. It seems to be a bit a theme, not only in the Dybbuk, which is kind of the undead, but also what, in the film, the famous opening of the Coen Brothers film, which you both so masterfully created, the idea of a ghost. Marvin Carlson wrote a lot about it, that all of theater in a way is ghosting. We represent dead people on stage, or it's Jan Kott said it's something between the living and the dead. You don't really know. The light goes out on someone pretends to be someone different, but now you have a ghost-like appearances on a screen. You had the Dybbuk, the ghosts come up on our screens or projection. How did you feel as an artistic engagement with it? Maybe also Yelena as an actor and being part of it. Was that also a way to engage with the central theme of the play, of the undead, or something that seems alive, but it's not live? Something that is there, but it's not really there. The big question, what is real and what is not real? We're going to have Carol Martin back about so much about the theater of the real. So theater always has asked that question. So it's Marivaux, and other, what is actually real? And so we have that here, and your play dealt with that, and you did it on Zoom, on screens, and so that idea of a ghosting, you took it very serious, put it out, and created something. Did you work with the medium? Did you reflect all about that? Maybe all of you can answer, but Yelena, maybe you start. Yelena.
I have something to say. It's interesting because you said it felt like, because this was basically the first real theater experience we've had, I've had all year, not counting the production in Hackettstown, New Jersey. It felt like a ghost of a theater production.
But you just said it was a real theater experience.
Yes, it was, because it was sort of a hybrid between live theater and film, because we had takes, because we recorded it, we pre-recorded it. This wasn't live on Zoom. So we had to do several things several times, but it felt like this is, I am Leia in the Dybbuk, and yet I'm not, because it is really hard to do a performance like that, which is, it's one of the major roles, and it's very hard to be possessed by the Dybbuk on Zoom. It literally felt like not half of, like a ghost of an experience I would have had on stage had I done it for real, on a big stage with probably the person possessing me very, very close, and not in Berlin. But and I didn't really want to watch the final product. And then when I watched the final product, I was like, it works. Something, even out of my experience, feeling that it isn't real, it was real, and it was real for so many people, because the feedback we got was absolutely incredible from all over the world. And this was us sitting in our homes in boxes. This is not the right word, but pretending we were doing theater, and yet somehow it was real for us, and it was real for so many people.
One of the things that that helped with that production particularly, and this is something I always think is far too much ignored in modern theater, and it has been the one universal unifying element in all cultures and all societies, going back as far as we know, is narrative. We have been so fixated for generations on form, and so fixated for generations on the artist's experience rather than the audience's and the artist's experience. And the key to that always is narrative. That's the backbone of how we communicate to each other. And what we did with the Dybbuk specifically was, in the process of adapting it, it was pared down to essentially the narrative, and so much of the stuff that was there for other purposes We just kind of peeled away. And that's part of the reason for its success with audiences. Because that's something that people have been interested in going back to Homer.
From another angle, I just want to say that the origin of the online production of the Dybbuk dates back to last summer when I was teaching a theater workshop for the YIVO summer program in Yiddish. And I wanted to do something with the Dybbuk in spite of the pandemic. So I called the class The Ghost in the Machine, the Dybbuk in the Machine. And
the Dybbuk is a spirit, a ghost of an undead who possesses your mind.
Right. And I took with that class basically the approach that Jeff Weiss used to take with us in Hotkeys, and That's How the Rent Gets Paid, which was to give them scenes, and I let them work on them, and then I'd have them come in on Zoom, and I'd give them a couple of suggestions here and there. I did not direct their scenes in any traditional way. And what we wound up with was a wide range of style, quality, whatever, but everyone achieved something. The scene that probably had the greatest effect was the one directed or teched by this guy, Uri Schretter. And that sort of gave the idea. Later, when I approached Alan and said, would you direct this? He said, I need an editor. And I was thinking, we need an editor who knows Yiddish. He knows people who don't know Yiddish who would do it for the little money that would come in. But then I thought, I know someone who knows Yiddish, who knows how to edit. And that's how poor Uri got looped into it. I think there are more possibilities for a live production of the Dybbuk that explore the inhabitation and also the mechanical or electronic elements of our current world. But I also think that this production that Alan really pulled together in an amazingly short amount of time is going to stand as a document for the rest of time. In fact, I would go so far as to say that as a narrative and as a representation of Ansky's work, of the original author's work, even though it's even more sharply edited than redacted than the film that's so well known, that this is the superior product. It restores elements that are missing from the film and grounds it in a way that just it's quite near and dear to me.
Amazing. It's a big thing to say, isn't it? I looked at it and it is haunting. It asks a lot of questions and of course puts you to mind, all this, what it deals with anyway, the past, the history, the obsessions, what we carry with us, what we try to escape from, as Kafka said, life is always how to escape, how to get out of something, but something is holding us back. Is this the first Yiddish production you guys know of on Zoom, which is not just reading, but it was a theatrical, as I say, or as Yelena said, a real theater experience? I haven't heard of another one. So most probably you are part of theater history. You created in Zoom time as a small company the very first Yiddish Zoom.
There were a million little productions of things, reviews or music or something like that. To my knowledge, this is the first. This is the first real production of a play and certainly that will have lasting value beyond just a pandemic entertainment, something of service to get us through this time.
And I'm going to repeat something. I'm sorry. I'm going to repeat something I said before. I mean, the thing we learned from that is that we can do certain things online. So it would. Shane and I were speaking recently about a play that I have a particular interest in, and I've been rolling this play around in my head for a while, and it's a very, very strong piece that could use a revival, that really needs a production. And we thought of doing it this way online. It would be basically impossible without massive, massive resources to do it for real. Well, now we are coming to the moment where online substitute theater, to coin a phrase, is going to be the last thing that anybody wants to see. So that puts us into a weird question ray timing. Do we go on and do this piece in a time when nobody wants to look at theater online, or do we wait 6 months, a year, and say, in the meantime, in the interim, do something with actual humans in the audience, and then go back and do this?
Yeah, it's a good question. My prediction is that perhaps it might be like with music. They have the great live acts, but you can go and buy the DVD. In the old days, you had the cassette. You can have it on iTunes, in a low quality, which actually is hurting the brain, as Neil Young pointed out in his research, that we actually might be destroying with this low resonance things. Our brains, for that live music is healing and live theater. And there might be the play on a TV, screen, on the projection, which is on Netflix, or it's on some online platform. So you have all of it, the live. And the same will be perhaps like in music. The theater will do the same, and a lot of theater companies also in Europe are thinking that the digital leg, arm, head, whatever you will say, will stay. There will be, next to opera, ballet, drama, there might be the online component, because also audiences, as we always say here, Brecht wrote for the children of the technological age, but now we have the children of the digital age, kids who grew up with the iPhone, iPad in their hand, kids who go to a normal book and try to swipe the images, and it doesn't work, and they are frustrated. And until they understand, it's a different medium. So it will be interesting. A question to you guys, coming to that, perhaps also content of Yiddish, the idea of being isolated, the idea of the danger outside in the world, that you can die at any minute, that the world can collapse, the uncertainty, in a way, the experience of Jewish immigration. How did you guys personally experience it? How did your families experience it? Your fellow artists? Do you feel it had an additional meaning? We had Kari Perloff with us, the great director, and she said she went back to kind of a spiritual rethinking of her Jewish history. She was surprised by that she did that next to acting, next to directing online. Writing book on Stoppard and Peter and her online directing, but that was something she went to. How was it for you all personally, the experience of Corona? Did it change you? Yelena.
It was hard. I mean, in the beginning, it felt like nothing had changed, because most of the time when we're not working, we are at home looking for work, basically, researching. And I think about 2 months in, it became clear that this is not like this is not just this, it doesn't feel like a slump, it feels more permanent somehow, and a large family, and everybody's really dispersed, and my parents are a little older, and the technology, but there's nobody there to explain the technology to them. It was really hard to sort of connect. You could talk on the phone, but we wanted to see their faces, and then the cameras weren't working, and they didn't know how to turn it on, and you're so helpless because you can't help, because you're so far away on the other side of the screen, and I felt like there were moments where I felt, there's nobody else out there. You're in your little bubble, and you go outside when the lockdown happened, and you go outside on the roof to clap for the doctors at 7 p.m. And that's the only time you see other people on the roofs and the balconies. And it was completely surreal. And then you try talking to them across the street and not really hearing them, like you just wave at them, so like, look, I'm a person, somebody sees me, I see another person, I should let them know I see them. And it's coming now, seeing friends and seeing people, it's like it's a surreal experience to be able to hug someone, to just, and to stand so close, you know, face to face and have a conversation. And who knew we took that for granted?
I want to tell a little, but let me expand on something about your, in response to your question about fear of the end during the COVID period. I have to say, I can only speak for myself, but for myself, for a combination of reasons, I never felt the same level of alarm that some other people did. For one thing, not without going into details, I have a medical history in Technicolor. So I've been through, I've had any number of delightful things over the years that I've survived. So my instinct is, this too shall pass. I also have a tremendous historical interest. I'm always thinking of anything in historical context, and I'm very aware of what went on in 1919. And I've then, of course, in earlier human history, we've had far worse things. I'm not to belittle our losses, but in the big picture of all of civilization, it's a different story. And not that long ago, in my own lifetime, we all remember the AIDS crisis. And we all lost people who were close to us, but we lost some people, but it did not end civilization. So I never felt inside that this was going to end civilization. I felt that instinctively that this was going to put us in a weird place for a limited period of time. And what comes out, the changes that this has made to everything we know, what will come out of the other end, that I have no idea. That to me is the great question. But I never feared that this was going to be the end.
From my own side, I did see a few people that I really cared for who died from this pandemic. One rather early on, a pianist by the name of Rick Unterberg, and it's a great loss. He wasn't too much older than I am. But I don't know how much fear I was living in with for myself with the pandemic. I was worried about my mother. I was worried about some other people that I know. But I was very happy being my own particular character to spend as much time inside doing nothing as I possibly could. And I think that has been all right with me to an alarming degree. It's a good rehearsal for being dead, I guess. Uh, I haven't used Zoom except for working type things like these events that we talked about. I haven't really hey, let's get together on Zoom and hang out, but maybe that's because what I do professionally is what I would do if I wanted to have fun anyway. The one Zoom thing that I really did, the one online thing that I did with any regularity was a salon with Everett Quinton and other people from the Ridiculous Theatrical Company. Every Wednesday night, we got together through Mark Urson, the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church. He set this up. And that was actually my first online pandemic show was the Der Ring Gott verblonget, the Ring Cycle of Charles Ludlam that Everett directed for Gay Pride. We had been supposed to do Camille, and that was not possible. So he put together the Ring Cycle. But yeah, that's it. I'm looking forward to a return to real life, but it's a funny, sticky thing trying to figure out how and what. My mother's vaccinated, so am I, so I figured no harm in me coming to see her. But like Yelena says, there's who can you hug? My aunt and uncle came up as well. Who can you hug? Who do you? It's okay. We'll get there. It'll take a little practice. Yiddish theater will come back more slowly than all other theater, though, I think. The audience is a little more health conscious, I think, or careful than whatever audience. Of course, Jews play a great part of any regular theater audience as well. just as an older crowd is a part of most theater anyway. But we'll get there.
And you touch on another question, which is a whole other conversation, which is the Yiddish theater audience. And we could go on for days about rebranding Yiddish theater and the purpose of Yiddish theater in this historical, ignoring the Corona moment for a second, but in this era, in this historical moment, let's say, that's a great big whopping question, but that's a whole separate conversation.
Yeah, these are all important questions. I also like what you said, Shane, that it's also experiencing in a way low-level death. What will happen to us? Someone said when you die, it's the way of nature to tell you to slow down. So and in a way, this virus slowed us down. And everybody said that, and it's a good thing. So it is a near-death experience, I think, and theater always has also done that. And what does death mean? All great stories here. So many are about them: love, death, and life. But is there something you feel that is inside that idea of your beloved Yiddish theater? And to make sure it's not just only performed in Yiddish, often it's spoken English with Yiddish idiom, so audiences can also, of course, understand it. But is something inside Yiddish theater where you feel this is or could be important for the companies, what we think about, what is important to us? Because we are looking. What will happen afterward? Things should be different and still, of course, part of the same tradition. But is there something where you say this is something unique to us and I think is worth looking at?
Yours.
No, I'm trying to understand that something about Yiddish theater that's important for everyone else.
We know we do something that's something that in the soul of it, that is of significance, perhaps, especially after a time of Corona.
Well, the wonderful thing about if we can do something after the time of Corona that we can get some nice, significant-sized audiences for, as we did in the past, by the way, it'll be a lovely kind of rebirth story, because of all things, people who are not closely connected with the Yiddish world think that Yiddish theater has been dead for the past 60 years, when actually in the last decade or two, it's been more alive than it's been since maybe the mid 20th century. So for that, as for something to give a feeling of continuance, of rebirth, that's a psychologically healthy thing which everybody needs. So that would be quite nice. Also, there's the value of the experience itself. To see something in Yiddish means to swim in the water of a specific culture. The very fact of hearing the language, which is you cannot replicate it in translation. You can do it with translation into English. You can do it with hearing the language and reading super titles over the stage, which is what we do in our productions. But you can't do it when you translate something into English, because you lose the essence of the thing. But seeing something in Yiddish and hearing that music of that language for a while is a trip to someplace else, which is the thing that we go to a narrative experience for, whether it's theater, whether it's literature, whether it's film, what have you.
I have something to say that's sort of, it, because we keep talking about the Dybbuk and the different worlds and the real and not real and the dead and the undead, and it sort of weaves through the entire, our entire conversation. There is a dramatic poem by H. Leivik called A Wedding in Fernwald, written in 1947, after Leivik interviewed the Holocaust survivors right after 45 and 46 in Europe. And it's about, it's a theatrical piece and philosophical ruminations on the nature of what comes after something major, like a major catastrophe like this. There's a wedding. It's a first wedding after the Holocaust, and the dead and the living are debating the entire play. Should there be a wedding? is it okay? Is it okay to move on? How do we move on? The ghosts of, and the ghosts are coming, and Elijah the prophet is coming, and the Messiah is there. Everybody's talking about, do we get past, how do we get past this? Do we get past this? And, you know, the living see the dead and the dead see the living. And there's something, it's a profound piece and utterly worth being done for real. But it's sort of, I feel like we need a little distance from kind of what we're going through right now, because it is a little easier to look back when a little time has passed. And I have no doubt that there will be some kind of Yiddish dramatic response, Yiddish theatrical response to sort of what has been happening.
That's a really interesting idea, because that's doing a play that has those kind of themes. Doing it for real is the perfect way for people to come together as a community after this time of so much loss and share those feelings and those questions. That's what theater is for.
Just for what it's worth, I put up a little thing with my friend Miriam Chaya Segal for the Yiddish New York event this past winter, which was a plague wedding, which is a traditional Jewish way of exorcising a plague from a community. You take the two least desirable characters that you know, and you conduct a wedding for them in a graveyard. Mm-hmm. So Miriam Chaya and I did this in drag. I was the bride, she was the groom. And we did that at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. So that's a little bit of a graveyard. I don't think it got rid of the pandemic, but you know, through the pandemic, there's been a lot of response to the pandemic. The YIVO, and I just saw some call from another Jewish organization asking synagogues to send in diaries of how they've dealt with this. And I don't know, I think the response is going on now, but theatrically for a response to happen, that might take a little time, and it might be on some metaphoric level, but it's an interesting challenge. Or we might just like try to forget all about it and move on.
Also an option.
How interesting. So there is a ritual to get rid of a plague. And
yes, yeah. It's called a plague wedding or a black wedding because the wedding canopy is black, not white like it usually is.
Is it a real wedding or is it a performative one? Or
it's a ritual. It's sort of, you perform it in hope. Not like an exorcism, but you perform it in hope of. Are they?
Well, it brings you closer to God. A wedding is a joyous event that brings you closer to God. A funeral brings you really close to God. Mm-hmm. And so doing these two together is going to obviously bring the whole community closer to God and perhaps drive away this plague, which could be a punishment for some sin, like somebody dropped the Sefer Torah or the community has done something. So there's this idea behind it. But yeah, that's the basic thought. There's a movie about a plague wedding, and it is a real wedding because it's a mitzvah. It's bringing closer to God because you're putting together these two poor people who could never get married in any way.
You remind me of something out of something you said triggered this, talking about a historical resonance. The Gosset Theater, the State Yiddish Theater in Moscow, which was one of the greatest producing organizations, one of the most innovative and daring, for at least a good chunk of its existence, Yiddish theater organizations in the world. When World War II was over, after everything that the Eastern European Jews and the Russians went through, instead of doing something like King Lear, which had been their signature production in the mid-1930s, or any one of the other heavy dramatic pieces, what did they do? They put on a light musical review, which they hadn't done anything like that possibly. I don't know if they had done anything like that ever before. they did a show called Freilachs, which was literally which means up tempo, happy tune,
dance.
happy song, happy dance, and they did this in 1947, I believe it was, and it was exactly for that communal purpose. And said, look, here we are, we've gotten through this, it's over, and now let's get together and be alive.
Yeah, and I think at least to me also as a bit, watching it from the outside, loving it. I remember Gimpel the Fool by Moshe Yasur, the idea to put stories out there and to look at the world in some kind of a fable, the famous, let me tell you a old Jewish joke, but actually it has wisdom in it. And in a way, these plays are very big, elaborate ones, and so much humor in it, and so much also sarcasm, and as I say, the Jewish humor. And I think something is in there that over centuries, I think, was developed also to help to survive these catastrophic events, to go on to do the next level. I remember there is this joke: a Holocaust survivor comes to God, and they meet, and God says, "I'm glad you're here." And he asks, what? How are you? And he says, "Fine." The survivors, "I'm going to tell you a joke." And God says, "I'm not sure if that's a good idea. I don't know." And he says, No. It is about the concentration camps. And God says, "Well, that's not funny." And the survivor says, "I guess you had to be there. So what an incredible level of dealing with something so complex, so undescribable, and what families are going through now. So many also Black actors or playwrights, we spoke to directors, so that we are all making our wills because we are the families on the lines. We don't have health insurances. What will happen to us? So, how do you really deal with this? Is what seemed to be a year and a half or 2 years ago unimaginable. So there is something, I think, in that experience, as with so many other cultures and traditions, of course, also, but especially in there, I think is something that is worth to engage with, because it's a deep wisdoms of survivors of catastrophes in there. My question also for you, what will you be doing? What do you have projects? We say we're gonna travel, or what is going to happen in your artistic, in your life? What changed? Will you focus on something different before, or what's in store for you?
This is a perfect note to end on. Something that Shane is responsible for, that we're going to be doing together. It's something that could not be a more cheery way to get out of this, get out of the the Corona year. Go ahead, Shane.
Yeah, we're getting ready to take Moshe Yasur's staging of Waiting for Godot in Yiddish to the Royal Dramatic Theatre in Stockholm this November. We're pretty excited about it. It's the first time that the Royal Dramatic Theatre is presenting a show in Yiddish, maybe anything in Yiddish. That's what the Swedes tell me. And so we'll play there, and then we'll play one show in Malmö in the south. And I think that'll be a great cap to this whole thing for all of us. Yeah.
Because what could be more fun than watching Godot?
Yeah.
Well, in Yiddish, it's a little different than it is in English. It comes across, even Alan, who doesn't necessarily like the play, saw Moshe's staging and said, "This I like." And
Frank, let me interrupt, because let me one thing about the Godot, because we're on that briefly before we wrap. It's Shane's translation of Godot, and I've seen productions of Godot. I was in an excellent production of Godot in English at Two River Theater in New Jersey. It's just never been my favorite play for a combination of reasons. And then in Shane's translation and Moshe's production, I had been asked to be in it originally, and I passed on it because I just wasn't interested. And then Yelena and I went to see it. And in the middle of that first production, in the middle of the first act, we turned to each other in the audience. We weren't eager to go because, we both know the play sideways, and, it's not our favorite play. And in the middle of the first act, we turned to each other and spontaneously and go, this is terrific.
Yeah,
And
they interrupted the show, but it was okay.
what Shane and Moshe did, and this is profoundly important, not only for Godot, but for theater, period, I believe, is so often Godot has layered on it levels of intellectuality and distancing from the audience and pretense that takes it away from the human essence. And what Shane's wonderful Yiddish, which is better than Godot's English, I mean that, and Moshe's smart, straightforward direction did, was it stripped all that away, and we were able to look at these people. We looked at these two absolutely universal figures, these two idiots standing there that we can all identify with, standing there and trying to figure out why we are all here and what is the purpose, what are we waiting for, what is it about? And that was the genius of that production. And I wish all theater of every kind could do that, could cut through the unnecessary and get to the human.
Yeah, incredible. I missed it when it played here, and we all know that also through Beckett, it is clearly referenced, originated from the experience of the Holocaust.
The origin play. By the way, I meant to mention, we did I later joined the production, and we did it here in Greenwich House. But we took the play to the International Samuel Beckett Festival in Ireland, and we did 10 or 11 performances there. There were almost no Yiddish speakers there. It was in Yiddish with the English translation supertitles. And I cannot tell you how many people came to us and they all said the exact same thing. I have seen Godot many times. I don't speak a word of Yiddish, but this is the first time I understood the play. This is the first time. Yeah.
Beckett would be turning in his grave at the thought that people thought they understood the play, but it's true. That's maybe the greatest compliment that I've gotten for that translation or involvement with the production is Irish people saying, "It's the first time I understood Godot."
Amazing. This is a play, of course, that somehow comes up in these catastrophic times. Susan Sontag famously did it, in the crisis in the Balkans. I think Paul Chan staged it with the Classical Theater of Harlem after Katerina in New Orleans, a fantastic outdoor production where he refused to do it inside the theaters. People that told him no one will come, thousands came for those 2 weekends, and what you did there certainly is remarkable. It's important. One wonders why it's not touring, why it's not showing, and it's okay to have subtitles. Why not? We see so many films now. It should also be in theaters. The Yiddish theater, the National Yiddish Theater in Romania, which is actually across the National Theater in Romania. I maybe one actor is left who is really a truly, quote unquote, a Yiddish actor, but they are Romanian actors. We learn Yiddish, and the audience still come and enjoy the place. It's an incredible phenomenon what's going on there, and why not here? Also in the city, such a big tradition and heritage. Why are your companies struggling so hard? Why is it so tough to find places, and why is it easier to get a recognition in Sweden or in Ireland for work that is of significance and also connected to New York history and to world drama? So amazing to think that perhaps, of course, someone will email us, no, there was another production, but as far as I know, the first serious online Yiddish theater production happened on Zoom in this year of Corona, and questioned everything, as Mita Rouse said in our talks, question everything, redo everything, and then go on to what you did. And I think this is what you guys did. So thank you for that little update on who you are, what you are doing. The theater you keep alive, and you put it into the center of your existence on earth. Is the theater, and art is a way of living. It's perhaps also a big provocation. And when you said we sit at home, we wait for a lot of theater people, nothing has changed so much. A lot of theater people never had jobs. They never have a theater to play anyway. They don't, So what is the very big difference, because maybe there are less jobs outside to support it, but it seemed like a lot of theater already lived under conditions of Corona for a very long time. without realizing it. So thank you all for joining. We could go on much longer. Watch Yelena and Alan in the Coen Brother movie, so you get a bit more. Maybe try to get a copy of the DVD, the Beckett, and maybe one theater will put it on here in New York and invite you after this talk. It certainly is of importance. And we go on this week with our Segal talks. We have David Godot, who ran the great Riverside Studios in London. And the time in the Riverside Studio was the Riverside Studio. Beckett rehearsed there. Giacometti was there. It was Tchaikovsky, filmmakers. Cantor rehearsed there. An amazing place. Something that, from what I heard and saw, so, something unrivaled, even unmatched. So it is quite an extraordinary, I think, hopefully again, talk and that we will have. So join us, be with us, and you guys, thank you for taking the time. Thanks for Halron for hosting us, and to all our listeners, thank you for taking the time out of your busy life. So much more talks are out there now. It is important, of course, also as an archive, I think, for the future. We are archiving the moment in the history here. So, but still, thank you so much for taking the time and for being with us. And tomorrow we have the great Carol Martin. We mentioned her today. Is the idea of the theater of the real. The question, what is really, she is a field, she co-created, she created, she wrote about the idea of the documentation of work, documentary theater, a theater that engages in many forms with the real. And we will hear from her and tomorrow about her work, her research, and what she thinks has changed in the time of Corona, or what has been confirmed, what she has been writing about, and what might happen. So that is important, and she will join us again with Emily Mann next week, who will talk about her work. We're going to have an update from the great Edinburgh Festival, and we will hear from around the world. We hear from a Polish and Turkish producer in Berlin. They did an artwork on the balconies. Artists in the Prenzlauer Berg neighborhood, some of them quite significant, important ones who lived close to each other, created work on their balconies outside, and it was really successful. People loved it. Thousands of people watched it. So let's see what other cities did in the world during this time, and like you who put together this this production. So thank you all, and I hope you will join us again. We need great theater, great artwork, but we also need great audiences, and it's important to listen. And this is what this is all about, a radical listening, and it's important what the artists have to say. So thank you guys, and I hope to see you in person soon. Bye-bye.